Welcome back to today's Explainer. We're zeroing in on a single, incredibly dense day of news, April 28, 2026. It's one of those days defined by massive, intertwined global events where everything feels connected. We're going to take this totally chaotic news cycle and synthesize it into a clear, single narrative. Let's dive right in.
All right, here's our roadmap for today. We're breaking things down into 4 parts. First, the global shockwaves from the Iran conflict. Second, we'll look at the latest escalations and diplomatic shifts. Third, a quick North American news roundup. And finally, we'll wrap up with disasters, tech, and sports.
So, starting with Chapter 1, Global Shockwaves, focusing on the Iran conflict and its economic and military fallout.
A global food emergency. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is officially sounding the alarm here. And this isn't just hyperbole. We're not just looking at a localized military conflict, we are literally looking at an immediate threat to global sustenance. For everyday folks, a global food emergency translates to bare supermarket shelves, absolutely skyrocketing grocery bills, and in more vulnerable regions, the immediate threat of famine. So what exactly is triggering this total breakdown?
Well, it really comes down to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. That's the primary choke point triggering all of this. With oil trapped in the Gulf, fuel costs are just soaring worldwide. And that massive spike in energy prices, it directly drives up the cost of fertilizer, which relies heavily on natural gas and oil to even be produced. No affordable fertilizer means crop yields plummet. The cascading effect here is severe. These supply chain disruptions are actually exceeding the worst logistical bottlenecks we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's a terrifying, textbook chain reaction.
And making matters worse, a complete stalemate between the U.S. and Iran is essentially locking this crisis in place. Iran's proposal is that they'll reopen the Strait of Hormuz, but only in exchange for lifting the U.S. naval blockade. On the flip side, the U.S. stance, led by President Trump, is a firm rejection of that proposal, because doing so would postpone ongoing talks about Iran's nuclear program. So thanks to these conflicting red lines, the blockade stays put, and this massive global economic bottleneck just keeps dragging on with no real end in sight.
Now, this energy crisis has pushed things so far that the United Arab Emirates just officially announced it's exiting OPEC. Honestly, this is a geopolitical earthquake. By ditching the cartel, the UAE is no longer held back by OPEC's production quotas. They can pump as much oil as they want to capitalize on these sky-high prices. This is a massive blow to Saudi Arabia's influence in the region and completely shatters long-standing global oil stability. The ripples from the Hormuz closure are literally redrawing the map of global energy alliances right before our eyes.
Moving on to Chapter 2, Escalations and Diplomatic Shifts, covering regional hotspots and realignment.
We're seeing a really stark contrast unfolding in Lebanon right now. Officially, the status is a nominal ceasefire, but the reality on the ground, it's active hostilities. We're seeing ongoing Hezbollah drone attacks targeting Israeli positions, while Israeli airstrikes in southern Lebanon have tragically killed 4 people and injured dozens more. It's a pretty heavy disconnect between the diplomatic paperwork being signed in capital cities and the actual, violent reality for the people living there.
We're also tracking 4 other massive diplomatic updates around the globe. In Moscow, Iranian Foreign Minister Araji just met with Vladimir Putin, securing explicit pledges of Russian support that could seriously complicate the conflict we were just talking about. Over in Belarus, there's a rare diplomatic breakthrough. A 10-person prisoner swap successfully freed prominent journalist Andrei Pachebut, offering a brief, much-needed moment of relief. Down in Iraq, a major political shift is underway with Ali al-Zaidi officially named the prime minister candidate right in the middle of severe internal instability. And finally, in Mali, West Africa is on high alert after some massive coordinated rebel strikes, easily one of the largest and most sophisticated attacks that region has seen in a decade.
So, with all of this intense geopolitical maneuvering and conflict happening overseas, it begs the question, what exactly is dominating the headlines here in North America? Let's take a collective breath, pivot away from the global warfare for a second, and look strictly at what's happening domestically today.
That brings us to Chapter 3, our North American News Roundup, focusing on high-profile domestic stories.
Domestically, the justice system is moving forward on a huge case. Suspect Cole Allen has now been formally charged with the attempted assassination of President Trump. This major legal development, of course, stems directly from that shocking shooting outside the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and it officially moves this high-profile investigation into its next judicial phase.
Shifting gears completely to a totally different kind of diplomatic event, we've got a massive cultural moment underway. King Charles III and Queen Camilla are continuing their 4-day U.S. tour.
The king is currently prepping for a highly anticipated historic address in Washington, D.C. It's a very visible, very significant moment for modern U.S.-UK relations.
Now, what does $8.1 million represent? That staggering figure is the exact street value of methamphetamine recently intercepted by U.S. Customs and Border Protection. This massive drug seizure was completely hidden away inside a commercial tile shipment trying to cross the Far International Bridge. It really highlights the sheer scale and complexity of ongoing border security operations.
Looking up north, Canada is actively pivoting its economy in direct response to that global fragmentation we discussed earlier. Their 2026 Spring Economic Update is zeroed in on building resilience, and their strategy is super fascinating. They're aggressively diversifying their trade partners with the explicit goal of moving away from fragmented global markets. Basically, by watching the massive supply chain disruptions in the Middle East and beyond, Canada is actively adjusting its national strategy to insulate its own economy from future external shocks.
Finally, let's wrap things up with Chapter 4, Disasters, Tech, and Sports, covering our global miscellany.
We do have to start this section with a very somber update out of Indonesia. Rescuers have officially recovered the final victims from a devastating train collision near Jakarta. This massive wreck has unfortunately left at least 15 people confirmed dead, which marks a tragic conclusion to the extensive recovery efforts over there.
Moving over to the tech sector, the Australian government is rolling out a brand new legislative approach. They're moving to specifically target and tax Meta, Google, and TikTok. And the purpose? To create a fund that directly supports local Australian newsrooms. It's a massive structural shift, essentially forcing big tech to directly fund the very local journalism their platforms often rely on for user engagement. You can bet the rest of the world, especially the US and the EU, will be watching this closely to see if it sets a global precedent for regulating these tech giants.
Echoing the financial framing from earlier, we've got one more massive number for you: $10 million. This represents the record-breaking prize fund that was just announced by the RNA and AIG for the 50th edition of the AIG Women's Open. It's a historic, massive investment, and it really signals the incredible commercial growth and institutional backing we're seeing right now in women's sports.
We've looked at the data, the diplomacy, and the disruptions today. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. With global supply chains fracturing and massive domestic shifts underway all around us, how will these ripple effects reshape your world tomorrow? Thank you so much for joining me to synthesize today's complex global web. Keep questioning the connections around you, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.